your argument has never been that people should be ashamed or guilty or feel a relation of rejection to what they come from. It seems to me it's that people should rethink, people in this island should rethink the kinds of communities of possibility that we actually live in, beyond the national frame that says there's something called Britain that connects me to this German family who live in a palace and doesn't connect me to people coming across on small boats. It's a question of thinking the kind of real communities that we're in differently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about that, Barnaby, because I actually do believe in shame. And I don't believe in guilt, because I think guilt is, Freud's discussion of these distinctions was very nurturing to me when I was writing a book later on called After Empire. So I think the problem about guilt in this context is that it is paralysing. But I think shame ought to be possible and ought to be useful. And I think there are some, settler colonial contexts in which the mobilization of shame has been an important element in the projection of a more habitable national community. I don't know if that's too optimistic, but I think people have every reason to be ashamed of what happened, but they're not responsible for it. I think that's the difference. They're not actually responsible for it, but they are responsible for fixing it. They're responsible for what they need to repair, but though the residuals, in a way, are not their responsibility. So I think in trying to make this political at all, rather than paralysing, rather than inertia-inducing, one has to maybe amplify the distinction between guilt and shame to some extent, and say that, I mean, the point about, I mentioned Freud, obviously, for him, there's a distinction between mourning, which is within mourning, there are two variants. There is the pathological variation of mourning, and the sort of healthier one, which is working through, and the unhealthy pathological one is melancholia. So I try to argue very strongly that we could leave the guilt in the melancholic version of a response to this, and we could find ways of working through that were, as it were, lubricated by a measure of shame. That was my hope.
I mean, in Freud, mourning knows its object, it knows what it's mourning, and melancholia struggles to know its object, it's repressed.
Yes, it struggles to know its object. Although I was very influenced by the writing that was done by some German Freudians who were implicated in the denazification process in Germany. Alexander and Margarita Mitscherlich. And they're very clear about the value and the virtue of working through. And I know that there's an enormous set of questions pending in how much we can say that Germany has worked through any of these things as it's all resurgent in the moment that we're in. And that's not a conversation that we can really do justice to in this kind of context. But I think there were a lot of people who, in a way, I was writing against, who wanted to make melancholia into the engine of a certain set of political responses, and that this was something that had come into focus, really through the experience that people had in the aftermath of the AIDS and HIV, the sort of mass death of people with HIV. And if you recall, you are not old enough to remember this, but they had a slogan, and their slogan was, "Don't mourn, mobilize." So in a way, you can see the argument in favour of melancholia, because they're saying we have a relationship with melancholia. We can weaponize our refusal to mourn as a way of galvanizing the political intervention we need to make in this context. And I think the problem, although in some ways I'm sympathetic to that response with regard to the forms of violence and the complicity of government in relation to mass death for HIV, I don't think you can sort of switch that response over into other areas and expect everything to kind of line up in quite the same way. So I think it doesn't transfer out of that. Whereas I think some people who are thinking about politics of class and some people who are thinking about politics of gender did imagine that that was the case, that they could transfer something like that into other areas.
The spirit of not mourning, but
not mourning, but mobilising. Whereas I'm saying, actually, yeah, be sad you're no longer the world's number one power. Face up to that loss. Work it through. And when we really find out what happened and what made that possible, the forms of, you say violence is a word people toss around so casually these days. I really don't like the casual nature of that, because the full horror of these things, we really can know much of that. We can't experience it as the people who went through it experienced it, but we can know enough, as Sven Lindqvist says. You always know enough. It's not knowledge you lack; it's courage that you lack to act on the knowledge that you have. So I feel quite strongly about that. That we need to have a chance to work through these things, and that means full immersion. It means full immersion in that archive. It means really understanding what happened. And yes, it wasn't you. It wasn't you, but you are, in a sense, responsible for it, and that's where we start. And that's why I suppose the idea of reparation becomes such a resonant one for people at the moment.
And it replaces old stories of progress where we're on a set of train tracks and we're moving from feudalism to capitalism to socialism, with a sense that great wounds have been done, but repair still has this hopeful language. It seems to me that shame doesn't have that hopeful
no,
potential.
It's true. It doesn't. I think it's my understanding of shame is very much developed in relation to a reading of some of the writings of people who came out of the experiences of genocide inside Europe in the Third Reich period. And not all of them are Jewish, and not all of them recover it under the sign of their Judaism. But I'm sure you're familiar with Primo Levi's last book, The Drowned and the Saved, has a beautiful essay on shame in it that I really found very powerful. And there he talks about his relationship with a man who was a fellow inmate with him inside the Auschwitz lager. And it's very hot, so obviously it's all more resonant for us, given the weather outside this building today. And Levi describes finding some water in a pipe while the two men are working alongside each other, and choosing to keep that water for himself and conceal it rather than share it with his fellow prisoner. And he talks, I think, in a very powerful way about the damage that did to their relationship subsequently. And I was always very, very struck by that.
I'm struck by that passage, discussion, because it always seemed to me that it was a horrible wrong that Primo Levi felt ashamed of that.
Really?
That it's a case where, where he should have been able to understand the force of the brutality of his conditions. There's an essay we've discussed, the amazing magazine Vedem that was kept by children in Theresienstadt. And there's an extraordinary essay as Yom Kippur approaches, the Day of Atonement, where the children ask what is it to mourn our sins in a concentration camp in a world where we are being sinned against so enormously. And I know you'd want to push against the idea that sort of to talk about the grand and the structural means that we have no time to talk about what we do and who we are. But it always seemed to me a horror that Primo Levi felt ashamed of taking the water. Yeah.
Rather than sharing it.
Yeah, because the conditions were so. It's like Hannah Arendt's criticism of complicity. The condition in the Holocaust. The conditions were so barbaric. No clean hands. Everyone in the grey zone.
Yeah, and of course Levi's argument about the grey zone is that in the grey zone you can't make judgments.
Yeah.
But I think that's why he's written an essay about shame, because you think, I mean, implicit in your response is the idea that he's more Christian than he realised. Perhaps the Catholicism leaked in. You know, I mean, Jean-Marie always called him the forgiver, and he got very angry about that. So maybe it's related to that.
Jean-Marie, another Holocaust
yes, another
survivor.
Holocaust. A prisoner of the Third Reich in the lager adjacent to Primo Levi, whose time there overlapped with Levi, but who emerged from that experience, like Tadeusz Borowski, the Polish inmate of the lagers, who wrote some extraordinary stories about that experience. All three of them suicides, all three of them people who emerged damaged from that in profound ways, but all of whom have quite different responses, moral and political responses to the meaning of what they suffered.